So in this tutorial, we're going to be looking at Puppet Warp in Photoshop. So a bit of a fun one now, where we can actually start manipulating and warping our objects or characters to start to move and behave in a particular way. So I've got these flowers that are going to have sort of blowing in the wind. I'll just focus on the one for the time being to keep it nice and simple. So I just stick with this one flower. And to start a puppet warp, I like to turn my layer into a smart object. So I'm going to right click it. I do this so that it keeps as much of the quality of line as possible, because through each warp it's going to start to sort of eat away at that quality. So by converting it into a smart object, it tries to retain that better. Also, by turning it into a smart object, it will put a filter of the puppet warp on, which will allow you to have access to all the pins that you place each time you duplicate a layer. Now that might have all sounded really foreign, but that's going to make sense as we start to go along. So, with the layer that I'm going to warp selected, I'm going up to Edit in my top menu bar, and I'm picking up Puppet Warp. So immediately a mesh went over my object. Up top I can see that I've got a normal type of mesh. I could have a rigid mesh, which it says it on the tin. You'll have movement that is a lot more rigid, or distort, which goes the opposite way, but I'm quite happy with normal. As for density, I'm quite happy with that. That's quite a dense mesh. However, I could make it even denser, which again is going to give fluidity of movement, and fewer points, which is going to have more rigid movements. Expansion is the space around your object. So at the moment, around is picking up 2 pixels because I might have a few sort of wispy lines, like this little bug might have disappeared if I didn't have that expansion in place. So if you have some scratchy, sketchy lines, you might want to up your expansion so that they follow when you start to animate. So first things first, I need to place a pin, which is going to be the main anchor to this entire puppet. So right at the base of that flower, I'm going to place a pin. Now I could try and animate from this, but all that does is it means I can move it from that point. What I need to create now are some pins that are contradictory or are going to pull and push against that pin. So if I place another one here, as you can see, I can pull and push my plant around the anchoring pin. And then I can even start to place some pins around the flower so that when I push this flower ahead, it makes me think about how the rest of the plant is animating as the wind blows it. And remember, when you start to pull an object in a certain direction, there is a bit of lag in doing so. So as this plant pulls this way, all my leaves are going to flop the opposite way first before being dragged into the new position. So I've done a nice slight movement so far, but what I might actually do, because I've just realised I've made a nice rookie error, is cancel all of that, because my frame 1, I want my flower to be in this position. So I'm going to create a new frame, and I'm going to make a duplicate of that smart object flower, to which I'm going to put my puppet warp on. So there we go. And here's another animation tip. It's best to, instead of now try and organize what frame 2 looks like in conjunction to frame 1, but to take it nearly all the way to where I want the last frame to be. And then plan the in-between frames of how I'm going to get from there to, let's just do a small, let's maybe have it open up in the wind a bit. From there to there. In fact, let's just take it further. Be a lot more fun. Sorry, as you may be able to hear, my computer is really struggling lately with all these tutorials. So press the tick to say that I'm happy with that first warp. I've got that onion skin behind so I can see where frame 1 was, and this is going to be my last frame. I'm going to create a new frame, and instead of working on frame 3, I'm going to tuck in between in this frame 2 position, and I'm going to use the layer 6 copy because it's got all those pins in place. Now this time you might want to be organized with your frames. So on that original layer, I'm going to put frame 1. On this new one, this is sort of frame middle. So I'm going to presume this might take me 5 frames to make. So I'm going to call that frame 3. And on this last object, I'm going to call that frame 5. So on the middle frame, I want to double click my puppet warp so I can pick it up and find the center moment between these two movements. Which, yeah, let's take a guess and a stab, it might be there. So my frame 3 doesn't need frame 5 on anymore, or frame 1. And on frame 1, I'm going to make a new frame in between, which is going to be frame 2. I'm going to turn frame 3 on, and I'm going to use holding down Alt while clicking onto the frame that I want to copy and dragging it beneath. I'm going to double click that and call that frame 2. Now to exit those puppet pins, I'm going to double click Puppet Warp. And I'm going to pick up those pins and start moving them again in between those two frames. So I'm now creating frame 2 by a process called tweening. So instead of jumping straight in and frame by frame trying to move my object, I'm using the information that I know where I want my object to go at the end, and I know where my object is beginning, and I'm filling in the in-betweens, which is a much more sufficient way to be animating because you aren't then creating hundreds of thousands of tiny frames to find out that you're getting it wrong. So between 3 and 4, which is going to be 5, I'm going to create a new frame, turn on frame 5, and I'm going to use frame 3, and I'm going to call frame 3 copy frame 4, double click Puppet Warp, and go in between those two frames. Go. Plus, by using this process, you can really more accurately work out how an object moves from A to B. So in frame 1, I've got it on 0 seconds, which might be a bit fast, but you know what, let's watch that first. I'm going to press play by using the space bar, and my plant starts swaying. So if I felt that that was a little bit too jolty, what I can do now is go in between those previous frames. So I could pick up 4 and 5 and make a frame in between. In fact, I could duplicate. I want to turn on 5 because 5 becomes 6. Duplicate 5, take off the word copy. Tell the previous 5 it's now 6. Double click the Puppet Warp and find a middle place between those two to have created a smoother transition. So just finding a space between those two previous frames. Click the tick. 6 can go off, 4 can go off. And there we go. Now I've got a smooth transition as it blows to a standing position. So that is Puppet Warp. And also just a really nice tip on how to do some traditional animating. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial, and I hope you find it useful for any animations that you make in the future.